Three, two, one, go.
Welcome into PressBox Live. I'm Stan the Fan Charles of PressBox and PressBoxOnline.com. And one of the things that we periodically delve into with the advent of legalized sports betting here and the casinos being in the state is we talk to Mary Drexler, who's the director of the Maryland Center of Excellence on Problem Gambling. And we also have William Hinman today. He's the peer supervisor, outreach coordinator at the Maryland Center of Excellence on Problem Gambling. And I welcome both of you to hopefully a fruitful discussion for some people that may be tuning in, Mary.
Yeah, thank you for having us today.
Well, it's our pleasure because we like to balance. We talk a lot about, betting on sports and all that. And I'll start with Will because I've never chatted with you before, Will. And you were very frank in both the notes about you, your resume. You've had a gambling problem, having a sports betting problem.
Absolutely. I sports gambled for about 23 years. Started sports gambling when I was about 19, 20 years old at University of Maryland in college. I was actually taking a trip to New York with my girlfriend. It was the first time ever at the big city, and somehow we landed New York Giants tickets. And I was excited to go to a game, see what it was like in the New York Giants Stadium. And a guy told me, you can place a wager if you call this guy. He's a bookie, he'll take your bets. And I didn't really care about who was playing. They were playing the Cardinals and the Giants. I didn't care.
Right,
We
right.
won. So I was like, all right, I'll take the Giants. I want to root for the home team, and I'll take the over because I won a lot of points. And I always say, what's the worst thing that happened to somebody that may be at risk of having a gambling problem?
You won both
I
bets.
won. That started a very long relationship with sports gambling. And then at the age of 21, I couldn't wait to take my first trip to a casino. Got in a huge argument with that same girlfriend because I'd gone to the cash machine and spent more than I planned to spend. But I knew I wanted to go back eventually to try to get my money back. But back then, you didn't have casinos locally. So it was a trip that I'd only take, a few times a year. But
Yeah.
if I could place a wager on it, I would. I love the action it produced.
Now, Mary, I'm not going to keep you out of this long, but I just want to get Will's
No,
history a
no,
little
I
bit
love
before we
for
talk
people
about
to
this.
hear his
Will,
lived
you
experience.
mentioned that you gambled 23 years. How many years did it take you to realize it was becoming a problem?
So, it took 23 years for it to progress to where I crossed that invisible line and I started gambling with money that I couldn't afford to lose. And, that's when it really starts to get dangerous because we start chasing those losses and it can get ugly. Now, certainly there were many times that I gambled and lost more than I planned to lose, and I would chase it for a little bit, but I would never chase it to the point where it was going to destroy my life. But I found myself at high risk in 2013, and I crossed that invisible line. But if I look back, before I ever thought my gambling was a problem, I can see now clearly that it was a problem for years because it destroyed my first marriage. And it wasn't the money, it was the preoccupation.
Patient, yeah.
I was just, when I was there, I wasn't there, and back then was before cell phones where you had data phones. But if we were out having dinner, I'd make sure I was positioned to be able to watch a game or at least keep an eye on the ticker with the scores scrolling at the bottom of the screen. Or I had season tickets to the Ravens for 10 years. So I was at the game every Sunday if they were playing at home. And then I'd be up at the bars, closing down the bar, watching the 4 o'clock games, watching the 8 o'clock games. Just the constant preoccupation. I was just emotionally not available for my first wife. And
Mary, before we start talking about this time of year for gamblers, that's a story you've heard probably quite a bit, Will's story. But tell me, when somebody gets to that point, is it almost like they've given up? A lot of times they might be giving up hope that they can actually get their life back in order. How scary is that moment of realization for them?
Yeah, oftentimes when someone calls the helpline or gets transferred to a peer from our helpline, it's because they do feel they're at rock bottom, that there is no hope, there's no help. They're not aware that there are resources available, especially here in Maryland, for them, so they can, get the support that they need. So that's part of the work that our peers do is, and we know that problem gambling is the addiction with the highest rate of suicide, because it's not just the financial losses, but as Will started to talk about, it's relationship loss, job loss potentially if all you're doing is thinking about gambling. So there's so much that would impact an individual who starts to say, the world would be better without me. So.
Will, one of the reasons I know Mary wanted to schedule this at this time, this is a prime season for triggering, maybe a little bit excess here. You've got the World Series coming up. You're right in the middle of college football, pro football. We're in week coming up already on week 7, I believe it is already. And you got NBA basketball about to start and college basketball starting soon. Is this a prime season for things to either start to begin with or start to roll out of control?
Yeah, this is an exciting time of year
Yeah.
for gamblers. I certainly remember this time of year. And I remember when it was only baseball for a while and that's all you had to gamble on. And all of a sudden, like you said, all the other sports start up and it's an overstimulating time of year for gamblers, that's for sure, without a doubt. And I certainly think it's a time of year, especially this day, like back when I used to gamble, you place a bet on a game and you'd have to wait 2 or 3 hours for the game to be over before you can place your next bets. Now you can bet on every play, you can bet on this next quarter. I don't even know exactly how it works, but I know you can just constantly bet throughout the game now, which I think puts people more at risk at losing money quicker and probably hitting a bottom quicker, which is probably why we're getting a lot more calls from younger callers these days.
It's interesting, Mary, to have Will on because he's a recovered gambler.
Mhm.
He used the word exciting. And that's something we don't tend to think when it becomes a problem. The excitement's kind of gone out of it, but the excitement is what captures you. And finding something to replace that when you're recovering is exceptionally hard. I'll ask that of both of you. I'll start with Mary.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it does bring the thrill of just doing your next bet, wanting to continue the gambling. That excitement, people don't realize that same brain activity you get when you're using drugs or alcohol, where your
Yep.
brain gets stimulated. That same thing is happening when you're gambling with the dopamine rise. So it is it's a tough time because people find themselves caught up in that and caught up in that excitement. And we always have to remember that about 90% of individuals can gamble safely and recreationally, but there's about 2 to 5% of individuals who are more apt to develop a gambling problem or actually gambling disorder. And there's another 5% that are at risk, and they need to start to understand what they can do, what tips, if they're going to choose to play, how can they do it safely? And then what warning signs to look out for.
Will, that the fact that you've been there, and I'm not taking anything away from Mary's knowledge of this stuff, but it's more clinical and
Mhm.
talking to people, you were there. That excitement, how hard is that when you're grasping with it, how hard is that to replace? Because like a lot of addictions, everything else just seems to pale in comparison to those exciting times.
Dan, I'm so glad you asked that question, made that point, because this is a conversation I've had with many gamblers. And you're absolutely right, because the reason why I gambled for years was not to make money. I wasn't turning to gambling as a form of making money. It was because I loved the effect it produced on my brain. Gambling was my favorite high. I mean, honest to goodness, I got the dopamine hits. And I remember one of my buddies used to always call me an adrenaline junkie because I was always looking for that next thrill. And it wasn't just gambling. I lived that fast life. I just anything that was exciting, concerts, whatever I could
Yep.
go to, was always the next high. And the conversation
Couldn't
I
bet
had
you
with,
couldn't bet on a concert though.
yeah, exactly. But you know what I'm saying? Just living that fast life, clubs and, extravagant spending and being the big shot, that type
Sure.
of thing. And what I had to learn in recovery was the first thing someone told me is that it's okay not to always feel okay. Because I think that's the way it is with any addiction. You know, why do people drug? Why do people, drink? And I'm a recovering alcoholic too, by the way. It is because we want to always feel okay or we want to always feel high. And what I had to learn in recovery was I want that peace and serenity because around every high comes a low. You're always going to hit a low somewhere around the corner. It's coming. And now I try to stay somewhere in the middle. I don't want to be too high because I don't want to experience those lows. And that's something I think we learn in recovery. And that's a conversation I have with many people. Like peace and serenity becomes the high. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And I've had a problem with gambling before myself. So I know where you come from.
Oh, thanks for
Mary,
sharing.
the issues at hand, um, tell me from a clinical perspective, if 100 people start gambling at the same time, on various things, how many of them will develop a problem, and how many is it not a big deal? They win some, they lose some, but they're not obsessed with it like Will or I would have been.
Yeah, the overall statistics are about 90% of the population can gamble and they can do it recreationally. But given it depends who that one set of 100 people are, where they're coming from. All 100 could end up developing a
I
gambling
got,
problem,
I got,
or be at risk for developing a problem. But then there's a number of people who are able to control the gambling when they are gambling. They're remembering to not to gamble when they're overly stressed. They're remembering to get up and walk away from the table or walk away from the video lottery terminal and take a break. They set a budget when they walk in and then they walk out if it's a casino. So I think right now the thing that we're seeing is number one, younger adult population, even that 18 to 24, because of mobile and online sports betting,
yeah.
where it's right at your fingertips. You don't have to leave your home. So that just increases. We are starting to see that. We're actually getting calls. We've had a few calls from parents of young adults who are worried about a college age youth using their financial aid for gambling money because those checks go to the students. So it's tricky, but we are seeing it, and we are concerned about as we expand the legalization of gambling and more becomes online or mobile.
Yeah.
That's where we might see a more significant increase in the number of individuals at risk.
When you get people that call the hotline, and it's up on our screen, it's 1-800-GAMBLER, and
Mhm,
that reads as 1-800-426-2537, or visit helpmygamblingproblem.org.
mhm.
When you get calls and people really come to you and they're totally devastated and down, how quickly do they, once they've broken through to talk to somebody, how quickly do they think, well, okay, I'm over that. I can go back and do a little bit. I can control it.
Yeah, well, I'm going to let Will talk mainly about it, but what I can tell you is if they've finally gotten to the point where they can at least call the helpline.
Yep.
Um, and we do have treatment providers that have been trained on the issue of problem gambling, and we do have our peers. We find that most individuals want to talk to someone with lived experience before they decide that they're going to go into treatment.
Okay.
Not everybody wants to see a counselor. Some people just want a support group. A lot of people want to talk to a peer first, but I think Will can tell you his experience with people who think, oh, I've called, but now I'm thinking about it. I really don't have a problem, and how he deals with that.
And it really varies. It varies where somebody's at in their journey. And sometimes when people call the 1-800-GAMBLER helpline number, it's because they just lost their paycheck or they just drained their account. So it's really easy to think that we're done gambling when we have no money. And gamblers will tell you that. They're like, yeah, I always feel like this when I lose my paycheck, but I know next time I get paid, it's going to be a different story. And of course, I I do my best to have the conversation and give them, every reason in the world why life is going to be better once they stop turning to the, I always say, once we stop turning to the problem as a solution, life gets so much better because that's what we're doing. We're just constantly turning back to the problem as a solution. It's like being a quicksand where we just dig ourselves deeper and deeper. And sometimes they're ready on the first call. Sometimes it takes them a couple more weeks before they call me back, or a couple months, or even I've had people, it's taken a couple years before they finally hit that unfathomable bottom and they're ready.
I pose this to both of you. We tend to think of coming to you guys, at the center as zero tolerance to any more gambling. But I've often heard the phrase that you like to meet people where they're at. How important is it that they understand that it doesn't have to go from 100 miles an hour down to 0 miles an hour, like immediately on the first visit? And how much do you count on them coming to their own realization? Mary, I'll throw that to you first and then Will.
Yeah, that's a primary goal of ours. Is when someone calls, it's not us giving them advice on they have to stop today or they have to stop tomorrow, or they can't cut back, they just have to stop. We want them to tell us where they're at. An effective thing is you got to listen.
Yeah.
You have to hear their story. Their story may not be the same as Will's story. Their story may be entirely different. So you've got to hear the story and then, provide them with options. Where do you feel you can start this process? And Will, if you want to tag on to that.
You're absolutely right. I mean, we have to meet them where they're at, and I tell everyone, I can't tell someone whether or not they have a problem or not. I can't tell someone whether they want to quit gambling or not. That's an internal decision we all have to make. I know for me, I don't want to activate that area of the brain I talked about that gets those dopamine hits. Because
Yep.
once it starts getting even just a little of those, it's going to want more. That's for me. It's just the same thing. If I take one drink, I'm off to the races again. But for some people, if they're casino gamblers and that's where they lost all their money, they still want to be able to buy their lottery tickets. Or some people are sports gamblers and they still want to be able to play fantasy sports because that's their social thing. I just tell them they have to watch out for the risk, because if you're doing fantasy sports still, you're still paying attention to all the injuries, the scores, watching the games. And it's still really hard to be in the middle of all that and paying such close attention, not to be, at risk of maybe placing another bet down the road and relapsing. But we're here to meet them wherever they're at. We're not here to tell someone they have a problem. As a matter of fact, the center's not even opposed to gambling. We're neutral on gambling. We just want to make sure if someone has a problem that they know that there are resources available if they need help. And a clinician can work towards harm reduction just like you do with drugs. There's harm reduction for gambling where they can set goals. And that's why I tell them, there's no cost treatment in Maryland. I don't know if we've talked about that, but we
No,
can
we
refer
haven't.
them to, yeah. So there's no cost treatment. There's a problem gambling fund set up that offers no cost treatment, not just for the person with the gambling addiction, but also for the concerned other. So any Maryland resident negatively impacted by problem gambling qualifies for no cost treatment, and they can work towards harm reduction, basically setting goals on how much time and how much money they want to allot to be able to gamble each week, and see if they're reaching their goals, see if they're meeting their goals. And like Mary said earlier, sometimes they see that, okay, maybe I do need to stop gambling. Sometimes they're happy with the goals that they're meeting, but it's not up to us to tell them.
How often does that happen, Mary, where somebody that's got a problem thinks they can control it and they do cut back, but then they suddenly realize, this, like Will admitted, it's causing a problem. I'm never really focused on my life. I'm focused on the gambling, the getting high. Uh, and then they say, I now understand I really need to stop. Does that happen fairly often with people?
Yeah, I think it happens often enough.
Yeah.
Because they're not only looking at those financial losses, like I said, but even if they cut back, there still could be relationship issues. There still could be other issues that are going on. They could be depressed. There could be a lot of other factors. So just cutting back isn't enough to really help them get back on track. And I think they begin to realize it if they're working with, or if they're utilizing the resources available to them, being the peers, being treatment providers, being a support group.
just want to reset. Mary Drexler is the executive director, or she likes to call herself the director of the Maryland Center of Excellence on Problem Gambling. William Hinman, or Will, is the peer supervisor, outreach coordinator at the Maryland Center of Excellence on Problem Gambling. If you think you have a problem, visit helpmygamblingproblem.org or pick up the phone and call 1-800-GAMBLER, which is 1-800-426-2537. Mary, one of the things is finding what are some of the warning signs for people to let them know on their own before the money gets out of hand that they might be starting to swim into some deep water.
Yeah, I think some of them are feeling restless or irritable when they are trying to cut back or stop gambling, or they're using the gambling to escape a problem, or to relieve their feelings of feeling helpless, trying to get back lost money, what we always call chasing our losses,
Oh,
lying
I've done that. I've done that thousands of times.
lying to family or friends about what you're doing, keeping it very secretive. You're spending more time and money. It's not just the money, but spending even more time on the gambling activities. I guess just being unsuccessful on trying to cut back or stop as well, even though you may begin to start to realize this is a problem, you just can't do it. You need that next, what you would say with drugs or alcohol, that next fix. And also the serious financial trouble, or feeling guilty or remorseful when you're doing the activity too. You know, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be running to that ATM machine. I shouldn't be using all my money, but you continue to do it.
Well, when people get to you as a peer supervisor who's been there, how many times do you have people that fall back? Obviously you do, but how painful is it for you to watch it happen and still be there to support someone who still is in the realization phase that they've got a problem, but they just can't kick it at this moment in time? It's like, is it like the Will Rogers thing? I never had a problem quitting smoking. I know I did it 1,000 times, you know.
It's painful. I mean, it is painful to watch, and like I said, I'm a recovering alcoholic too. So I see
Yep.
with that, with any addiction, it's painful. But unfortunately, they say, when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of change, and that's when recovery becomes possible. And I just think that's part of people's journeys. And like I said, it's an eternal decision that only we can make. And I'm not here to tell someone. I can tell them share my experiences and share things like that with them, but I can't tell them when they're ready or not. But certainly, there's been some painful situations that I've had to witness and watch people go through a lot before they finally become ready, to make some changes.
Mary, we started with what a prime time this is for somebody to get, because as Will even admitted, he called it an exciting time. The World Series is about to start. Football, where you really think you know what teams are going to win or lose games and by how much, because you've gotten through a half a season. So it's triggering right now. But is January or February just as triggering, or is this really truly, we called it the prime time? Is this a more dangerous season?
Yeah, I think it's the beginning of the dangers on, especially with sports betting. So it is the beginning. We probably wouldn't see much of an increase in people reaching out, probably more so into November, December. But we also see a real spike into January, February when we get closer to the Super Bowl, and definitely see a spike in March with March Madness and the basketball tournaments. But I have to say, we're seeing, I think, and Will can attest to this, a pretty steady flow of more people reaching out now for help. And I think part of that is we've been able to do a little bit of advertising on the 1-800-GAMBLER number.
Yep.
Not as much as I'd like, because where I think the I don't know where the interest comes from individuals, maybe some who've never sports bet, is the advertising the sporting industry does, the gaming industry does, is a lot. I'll just put it that way, is a lot, and you can't miss it. And it's getting, you can get free bets if you bet $5 of your own money.
Yeah.
You can, but it's constant during the sporting season. And with all the sports right now at the same time, we're seeing more and more ads. But again, I think people are starting to recognize as legalization of gambling goes on that there are resources here in Maryland, and we need them to take advantage of it. The last thing I want to say is when they go to our helpmygamblingproblem.org website, there is a way to take a self-assessment. So if you're not even ready to call the helpline, you can kind of go through that self-assessment form and see for yourself if you think you may be beginning to have a gambling problem.
I've got a couple more questions if you guys both have the
Yeah.
time, okay?
Yeah.
Is when they call and somebody's really serious about, like trying to tackle this problem, is there, Will said that there's a way that it's paid for, and I assume that the licensees of the casinos and the sports books contribute to that, correct? I would think
Casinos.
casinos do.
The brick and mortar casinos contribute. Right now, it's based on a tax on the table games and the slot machines.
Okay. Is this just something that they'll get to Will or a counselor,
Mhm.
and then it's like up to them to call again? Or is there a place you can go and stay for 3 or 5 or 6 weeks to detox?
Yes, we do have now 4 residential facilities in Maryland where we can refer someone with a gambling problem to go to 21 to 28 days.
Okay, that's important to get out there. And then I wanted to ask you, Will, what percentage of this problem is young men, and what percentage is women? Do females have? I know they do, but is it significant the numbers of females that get addicted to this?
I mean, we're definitely seeing a rise in females in my meetings too. I attend, 12-step meetings, Gamblers Anonymous, and without a doubt, there's been a rise in females. I think there's a lot more games that attract them, and I don't know what they are, these online games that women seem to be really attracted to.
Right.
But certainly we've seen an increase in younger male callers too over the past couple of years since the sports gambling was legalized as well. So I think you're seeing a lot more wide demographics of people calling now.
Yeah, nationally, Stan, it's about 60% male, 40% female, but it is looking like it's going up. And so the viewers are aware, our researchers just completed conducting a study in 2024 with the results coming out next year. So we're going to have a better picture about what's happening with problem gambling in Maryland next year.
One of the most painful movies I've ever watched, and it's one of my favorite movies, and it dealt with alcoholism, was The Days of Wine and Roses. And that was a case where someone who was a happy-go-lucky drinker, and he meets this innocent girl and they fall in love, and he takes her down the primrose path into being an alcoholic. He's able to give it up. She isn't. Do you find many couples that get involved in gambling in that way, Will?
Yes, I do. And a lot of times it's one of the spouses blaming the other one for getting them started, you know what I mean? And a lot of times it's one has a much bigger problem than the other one. And then sometimes one of the spouses wants to keep gambling, the other one doesn't want to. So yeah, I've seen a lot of different dynamics, and usually they have to learn, it's like the non-programs talk about, we can't control what someone else does. We can only control ourselves and lead by attraction, not promotion. And I've actually known spouses that have quit. I know people that are celebrating 2 years who their spouse still goes and gambles, and they've accepted the fact, hey, I just don't want to hear about the losses. I'm not going with you.
Yep.
And if they're able to stay in that relationship and that's healthy for them, and others find they have to actually part ways in order to
Yeah.
protect their own recovery. So absolutely, I've seen that.
Hey, this has been a great, lively discussion, Mary. It was a great idea to bring Will into this.
Mhm.
We've been talking for the last 30 minutes with Mary Drexler, who is the director of the Maryland Center of Excellence on Problem Gambling, and William Hinman. He's the peer supervisor outreach coordinator at the Maryland Center of Excellence on Problem Gambling. I look forward to talking to you about this again in the future. And again, the number to call is 1-800-GAMBLER, 800-426-2537, or visit the website helpmygamblingproblem.org. Remember, there is help out there for you if you think you've reached the end of your rope. All right. Thank you both for coming on.
Thank you
Thank
so
you for
much for
having us,
having us.
Danny.
All right. We'll talk again soon.
All right.